Good day. This is Terry Difazio, and you're watching Soundcheck. Well, folks, we're back again. I'm here with my partner in crime, the incredible Tod Pronto, and we're going to be talking about a musical era before Tod was even born.
That's right. But I like this musical era.
Yeah. It gave way to all sorts of creeping, crawling repulsiveness.
Yes, it did.
And innovation as well.
Much innovation.
Yeah, for sure.
Have we seen a decade? We'll see. People haven't guessed what decade yet, but I don't think that we've seen a decade with as much innovation since then.
I would probably not until at least the turn of the century of 2000. Anyway.
Yeah, but musically, not from a technical standpoint with the behind-the-scenes stuff that nobody sees, but just the stuff that people really notice. This decade did a lot of different stuff.
Yeah, and that leads me to the first point I want to make, was that we're talking about, of course, the 1960s, the music of the 1960s. And in the 1960s, if you turned on to AM Top 40 radio, you could hear just about anything.
Yeah.
It didn't matter how good or how bad it was, you'd hear it.
Yeah.
For example, you could tune into Cousin Bruce Morrow on WABC New York.
Cousin Brucey.
Yeah, Cousin Brucey, or Big Dan Ingram. And you could hear anything from, say, Petula Clark to Steppenwolf to Jimi Hendrix to any of the softest stuff to the hardest stuff that there was out there at the time. You'd hear it all.
Yeah.
You know.
That's interesting. That's before. When did FM actually kick in?
In the later part of the 60s.
Okay.
It was around out there. As a matter of fact, I have a good story about that one, too. I think it was about 1970 or 71, as I was driving in my car, and I was on a top 40 station, and these guys were talking about music styles, and all of a sudden I heard this music that was outrageously good. And they said, this is probably the music that's going to be going to FM, and it was Fireball by Deep Purple.
Yep.
Which we'll get to them later. They actually started in the 60s, but
Really?
That's all changed now, and I think about the only thing on AM now is sports talk.
It's pretty much talk radio. Politics, sports, and religious stuff, and it's pretty much all talk.
Mm-hmm.
But AM doesn't transmit sonic qualities of music very well.
No.
I used to joke when I started on WIKE when I started in radio, and AM radio has like no bass frequency whatsoever. And I joked that I was going to do a drum and bass techno show. You wouldn't be able to hear crap.
You'd hear blick, 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 blick.
Pretty much.
That'd be about it.
Pretty much, yeah. AM, and remember the I don't know if they started this in the 60s. I know in the 90s, I think it was all the rage trying to save AM, but they came out with AM stereo. Do you remember that?
That wasn't in the 60s.
No, it must have been in the 70s or 80s.
Yeah.
Probably 80s. And it didn't really catch on because you had to buy an AM stereo receiver. It was the only way you were going to get this. And they were ridiculously expensive. And FM sounded so much better than AM. And it came in stereo anyway that AM just kind of, it's pretty much all talk now.
The only advantage AM radio had was it got out a lot further.
It does. On a clear night, you can listen up here. You can listen to radio stations from as far away as
New York City.
Oh, definitely New York City. Sometimes even further.
I know that a couple of times I've been driving down the interstate, and I picked up WFAN New York sports radio.
Sure.
Listen to a football game or something like that.
Yeah, it has to do with the way the signal bounces through the atmosphere, and on certain nights, AM signals. I used to get a letter from a guy in the Netherlands.
Wow.
From WIKE. And certain nights he could pick up very faintly a signal on WIKE.
And he didn't run screaming?
No. Well, maybe he did. When the Trading Post started.
Oh, okay. Hello, this is Bjorn.
I remember getting those letters.
I've got a dog sled for sale. I'm in the Netherlands.
Oh, that's awesome.
Anyways, the 1960s started out kind of without a whole lot of fanfare.
Yeah.
The 50s gave us some innovation, okay? The 50s gave us, Bill Haley and the Comets,
Sure.
Buddy Holly and the Crickets,
I love Buddy Holly.
So What and the 7 Watt Knots. Oh, that was another band. I'm sorry. Elvis Presley. You had some groups there that were actually doing something new
Yeah.
or trying something new. By the early 1960s, you weren't getting anything new. You were getting a lot of doo-wop bands that were rehashing, and the only one I can really recall that was popular and it was kind of like was Pat Boone, and it was basically the 50s rehashed.
When did Little Richard come into play? 50s or 60s?
I think he was in the 50s.
Yeah, I think he was too. I think he was in the 50s. So so you had your early rock and roll, which even with Elvis and Buddy Holly had a lot of that doo-wop stuff still in it. Mm-hmm. It really did.
But it was new back then.
Right.
In the 50s, that was somewhat new.
Yeah.
And then like I said, you had Pat Boone, and there were a lot of other bands. So the rock music got kind of stale.
Yeah.
And there was even some bands that tried to push the envelope a little bit, like the Dovells. I remember the Dovells, Joey D and the Starlighters.
Yep.
Chubby Checker was around the early 60s and like that.
Bo Diddley.
Yeah. I don't know when he came out. He might have been around the 50s even, wasn't he?
I think he was.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
And then all of a sudden, something very strange happened. 1962, The Four Seasons came out.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
It was. I remember when the movie, they did a movie based on the Broadway show.
Yeah, it was Jersey Boys, right?
Jersey Boys. And
I saw it too.
you saw it way earlier than I did. And you told me that you got to watch that. And I never did until one day it was on HBO and I watched it. Am I wrong in saying that Clint Eastwood directed that?
I think he did, yeah.
Yeah, which baffles me because it's so not a Clint Eastwood movie.
Yeah.
But it's great. And
He
it
did a
really,
good job with it, yeah.
Yeah, and of course I wasn't around in the 60s, so I never paid much attention. I mean, I like Frankie Valli, but I didn't realize how much innovation actually happened with Frankie Valli until I saw that movie. And it's quite interesting. I'll let you kind of tell that story, because that was the story that you told me when you first saw the movie, and I said, huh. And then I was about a year late. I'm usually about a year late to everything that I do.
Yes, but he never misses out totally, ever.
No.
He may miss out for a short while, but he will pick it up later. Things that you and I, even recording that I did in the 80s, things that we took for granted had never been done. For example, when Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons were in a hotel room, and Bob Gaudio, who was actually the brains behind that, that whole outfit, he was not one of the Jersey Boys. He was like a upper middle class family who did touring, and he knew the business. And he said they wrote the song Sherry Baby in 1962, and they sang it over the telephone for their producer, Bob Crew. And Bob Crew said, fire up the 8-track, meaning 8 tracks of reel to reel.
Yeah.
And he said, we're going to double the vocal track, and it'll explode off the charts. And the engineer at the time said, we've never done that. Everybody does that now. They even do more than double track, but I was double tracking in the 80s,
Oh, yeah. You don't even realize how much is double tracked.
Oh, of course, and quadruple tracked and quintupled, and
Yep.
One
of my favorite tricks to do is when I record my vocals, I record it simultaneously on 3 tracks. So it's 3 of the exact. And I compress one, I put reverb on one, and I keep one plain, and I mix the 3 together.
Of course. That's how you get the particular sounds you've got. And even way back in the 80s when you were using 24 tracks, people did stuff similar to that.
Yeah.
Almost everything was double tracked or more. And now with Pro Tools, the sky's the limit with that program. I mean, that's one of the most amazing programs ever.
It's great.
Yeah. I think that there are other programs that are probably will do the same sort of things. For example, like Adobe Audition might do that.
Oh, yeah.
Sony Acid Pro would do that. Cakewalk is a good one.
Yeah, the reason Pro Tools just took off is because it's been the industry standard since the late 90s. Really because they were the first ones to get it right. And every studio's adapted to it, and it's just too much to switch over. And they keep up with everything. Whereas we won't get too off track, but Final Cut's a popular editing program for video, and that's losing its steam because they didn't keep up and keep innovating. They just kind of stayed where they were, and other software came out that was cheaper and better. But with Pro Tools, they're always innovating, and it's literally, you can record your tracks in your bedroom on Pro Tools, and you can go to any recording studio virtually in the world, like in New York City or LA, and just hand them your thumb drive and all your tracks go.
Yep.
And that's why Pro Tools is still around. But you could do that back in the 80s too. You could take your tapes off your 8-track player and put them in a few suitcases and bring them to a studio.
Armored car. Put them in an armored car, right?
Yeah.
Tractor trailer.
Hire a moving company.
What are these 900 tapes? This is my new album.
It's a new album, man. 10 songs.
I know. I used to record on that, on 8 tracks of reel-to-reel.
Yeah.
I remember that. It was when things went from 4 to 8, things opened up a bit. But when they moved up to 16 and 24, it was really a big deal.
When you were doing on 4, you were limited to completely 4 tracks, right?
Yeah.
So, but could you bounce 3 down to 1 with 4?
You could. What I did was I had a friend who also had a 4-track, and I would take the 4-track, I would mix the stereo and bounce it to 2. And leave 2 open and record 2 more. So my first album was actually done on 6 tracks instead of 4. 4 is really pushing it. You basically have to record 2 instruments at a time, which is a pain in the neck.
Oh yeah.
But when you move up to 8, it opens up everything. But when you move up to say 24, you can have 6 to 8 drum tracks. Every microphone on your drum kit can have its own track.
It's funny how much mic placement really mattered back.
Yes, it does.
And you listen to music, it still matters today, but if you listen to music from the 60s, some albums sound so much better than others. And the reason really is the engineer back then knew where to put the microphones. There's a group out today called Postmodern Jukebox. And I think they started in New York City, a bunch of college kids ended up going to I think they're in LA now. But what they do is Scott Bradley is the pianist and the composer and really the brains behind the whole group.
Yeah.
And he studied jazz piano and ragtime, and he's an amazing pianist. So what he did is he reimagines like the pop songs of today, what they would sound like had they been recorded back in like the roaring 20s and 30s. And he rearranges, Lady Gaga and all these people to like ragtime, and he gets incredible musicians. And the way they do everything is one camera set up in the room, everything mic'd live, basically with one mic, one take, and the sound he gets is unbelievable. But that is because he studied mic placement, and he knows that if you need to get an upright bass and horns on the same microphone, the mic has to be in a certain place, and the bass player has to be in a certain place, and the horns have to be in a certain place. And in the 60s, you listen to some records that could have, I think I'm jumping out of the 60s, but I've always wondered what Led Zeppelin would have sounded like had they been able to record even with the technology of the early 90s. Because they were such a heavy sounding band, and it's there when you listen to it, you can tell how heavy they were. But if they could have really done the tracking that they could do today, Led Zeppelin's sound would have been.
Actually, they came out, their first album came out in '69.
That's when 1 came out?
Yeah, so 1 and 2 actually. I think 2 came out maybe early 1970.
Okay.
But their first one came out in '69.
And 2 was the album that really started exploding rock music. But I just wonder what some of their stuff would have sounded like had they been able to really dial in the sounds.
Yeah.
But
Well, one wonders what any of these bands would have. If you hear,
what would Elvis have sounded like with auto-tune?
that's our show, folks. We're going to leave it like that. I'm going to go out and commit suicide now.
Would Bob Dylan have been a better singer?
No. Yeah, and Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, Hendrix just pretty much talked.
Yeah,
But he was such a good guitarist.
Yep. It's funny that he did some Bob Dylan songs
He did.
all along the Watchtower,
Yep.
like a Rolling Stone.
Yep. There's another one too.
He also Hendrix also did Wild Thing, but that was not Dylan. That was the Trogs.
Yeah. But yeah, Hendrix pretty much just talked. But yeah, boys and girls, before auto-tune, there was a whole music world that existed from the thing called talent, and it was the weirdest thing ever.
Yeah. Even in the 1980s when I recorded, if I wanted to do a harmony part and I couldn't hit the note,
Yep.
I would take my speed adjustment,
Your pitch, yeah.
my pitch, and I'd pull it out and turn it all the way down so that everything was way down here, and I would sing it, and when I hit it and put it back at the right speed, I was on pitch.
That's really interesting. I actually never tried that. I did that with instruments just to give it that little warbly sound.
Mm-hmm.
That's still something I think you could do today.
Mm-hmm. If you had reel to reel.
Yeah. Now,
Actually, you do have in some of your programs now.
there's
You have
pitch
pitch controlled,
adjustment.
yeah.
Do you sing in complete unison with the slowed down track?
Yeah, in other words, if I was to try to sing, I don't read music like Todd does, so I couldn't tell you. Say, for example, you had a song in the key of A, and I wanted to sing a harmony part that was a third higher, but I couldn't reach the note. I'd slow it down, sing it to where it matched where I wanted, and then when I sped it up, it would be in pitch.
That's awesome.
It would be in tune. And if any of you ever heard any of my album, you'll hear some of the spots where I did it.
That's incredible.
Yeah, we thought we were pretty clever.
I'm gonna have to look back. I'm gonna have to listen back to your album, and so that's where that's how the harmonies were done.
Yeah, because I did all the harmonies.
Yep.
I wanted to get a couple of other people to do harmonies, but they weren't available. But that's just the way that went.
But back in the decade that we're talking about, that wasn't really done a whole lot.
I don't think it was. In other words, Frankie Valli, when you hear any of the songs that the Four Seasons did, he basically sang them raw. They were right there.
And when they double-tracked, I don't remember this from the movie, when they double-tracked Frankie Valli's voice, he didn't sing it twice.
No, he sang it once.
They just put...
Two mics on him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
He had such a weird voice.
Yeah. Yeah, they were very different. They were something extremely new.
Yeah.
And no one had ever done that before. And their career spanned all the way to the late 1970s.
Yeah, they really went for a while. And then Frankie tried to come out on his own for a little while, and
yeah,
he did it with it. My eyes adored you.
Yeah, he did a few of those.
Don't
And I think he did.
ever let it you.
I don't know if he did it or if the Four Seasons did the soundtrack to Grease. That was in the 70s, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I don't know. I'd have to check that up.
Mm-hmm.
I could look it up on my little phone computer thing.
Okay.
Let's see. We'll do it real fast. Soundtrack to Grease. Grease 2 or Grease 1?
1.
Frankie Valli. Looks like he did it by himself.
He did it on his own?
Yep.
Then you remember that other song that they did? They did a semi-disco thing called "Oh What a Night," late December 1963. That was actually quite different for them too. When they produced that came out pretty good.
Was that a song that was originally recorded in the 60s?
No, I don't think it was.
See, I always wondered if that was just something that they had, like a B-side or something that they remixed.
I don't think it was.
Probably
All I know
not.
is it was quite different for them.
Yeah.
Moving right along, we're moving up to 1963, early 1964, and then you had the British invasion.
Yeah.
Things really started changing, and so many people got so uptight over this that people were smashing records, burning records, asking for a ban, and essentially it was the big three, the first big three that came out. you had the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Dave Clark Five.
Yep.
And their long hair was going to corrupt everyone and cause the end of the world.
And their long hair was about as long as my hair is right now. It's
Yeah,
like slightly longer.
Maybe a little longer, yeah.
It was kind of like just protruding the eyebrows.
Yep.
And that was the corruption of civilization.
Yep. It was all, we were all damned to hell. The earth was going to end, and that was it. And there were so many DJs that wanted to ban their music because John Lennon made a snarky remark as a joke that they were as popular as Jesus or something.
Yeah, he said we're more popular than Jesus, and what he didn't mean it degrading. He meant it as he really meant it as a sad state in society that somebody like the Beatles, a pop group, essentially could be more important to young people than religion.
Yeah.
But they took it as a conceited comment because John Lennon was a little conceited anyway.
Yeah.
But he truly didn't mean it as, like, he didn't say we're better than Jesus. He said we're more popular than Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And
sometimes British humor gets lost on we Americans.
Yes. Very much. Were you? How old were you when they played the Ed Sullivan Show?
Probably 12 or 13.
Did you watch it?
Oh yeah. Of course, you couldn't hear anything because at the time, the PA system in most places was one speaker hung on a wall.
That was it?
Halfway up the hall, on the side. That was their PA system back then. And the girls would do nothing but scream during the whole thing.
Yeah.
And that didn't matter. It wasn't just the Beatles. I mean, right after that, they had the Dave Clark Five. They had the Rolling Stones. And it didn't matter. The girls just screamed and screamed and screamed. It was like, I don't understand this. I really don't understand. You're there to hear the band.
That drives me nuts. I went to a concert in Burlington last Friday or the Friday before, and it was a upright bass, electric guitar, drums, and a vocalist. Like, this isn't a huge rock show.
Right.
And people were yelling and screaming so loud you couldn't even hear the music. And I was like, why did you pay money to come see this show if you're just going to yell the whole time?
Mm-hmm.
I like to hear the music when I go. That's like going to a movie and wearing like a blindfold and going, ah!
Yeah. That happened in 1999 at a ski chalet in Maine when I went to see Kenny Wayne Shepherd.
Yeah.
The people around me were so drunk they were just yelling the whole time.
That would drive me nuts.
Yeah, it did us. We left halfway through it. It wasn't a good concert. I mean, Kenny Wayne Shepherd played well, but the sound system was hard. But I never understood that. But Ed Sullivan really launched a lot of careers.
He did. And it was too bad he could never, free his neck from his shoulders.
Yes.
No.
He had a really big shoe.
He did.
Size 15.
Essentially, that's why the Beatles stopped touring, though, wasn't it? Because they couldn't even hear themselves play.
No, they I don't think they really liked touring that much. And the funny thing was, we'll get to this next group of bands, but for example, Cream. Eric Clapton and Cream,
Sure.
They toured more in 2 years than the Beatles did in 8.
I could see that.
Yeah. They just, I think with the Beatles, I'm not sure what it was, but it was probably something to do with music. Lennon wanted to go in one direction, McCartney wanted to go in another direction, and Ringo didn't care where they went as long as he made money, I guess.
As long as Ringo could play a 4/4 beat, he didn't care what direction they went in.
Every once in a while he'd come out with something interesting, but he was not one of your more notable drummers.
He wasn't, but he was. It's funny because he was like an innovative drummer by the standards of keeping it very simple. Like some of his beats on like Come Together, that high. He wasn't actually playing a standard beat. He was kind of, but it's not complicated stuff.
No.
I mean, you're a drummer, obviously. Yeah. But there was something about Ringo where he could just keep it in the pocket and just like he was a human metronome.
Yeah, and that, speaking of human metronomes, who could be more so than Charlie Watt?
Oh,
Rolling Stones, who couldn't, if he had a thought about an innovation, it would die of loneliness.
It would. He had to be, though, with the Rolling Stones because Keith Richards is so out of time whenever he plays the guitar. That's my big, there's always the argument, the Beatles or the Stones, the Beatles or the Stones. And a lot of people will go with the Stones because they rock harder.
No.
But the thing is the Stones, to put it in layman's terms, suck.
Yeah. Musically, they're not very complicated.
No, the Beatles, even though the Beatles were writing parts that were too complicated for even them to play,
Yeah.
that shows a little bit about their innovation.
Yeah.
Musically, the Beatles could mop the floor with Keith Richards' shaggy hair.
Yeah.
But Charlie Watt was the reason the Rolling Stones work, because he would just be like right there, always in the pocket, always right in the place, and Keith Richards could be high on crystal meth or whatever he was on and just be playing his 5-string guitar. By the way, do you know that story?
No, tell me, please.
Okay, so he has a Fender. He plays open tunings, and he's got a Fender Telecaster that doesn't have the low E string on it, which is a very low string.
Right.
And now the guitar, mind you, is tuned to the key of E flat, so the E string is pretty important. So he tunes his guitar to open G, and because the G string would have to be incredibly low to be a G, so he could just ring it out. And open tuning means you can strum the guitar open without, I'm left-handed, so let me do this for you guys. Strum the guitar with your right hand and not even use your left hand to make a chord, and it'll play the G chord. So Keith Richards would have to then put his finger on the probably 7th string to make the G note, so he just got rid of that string. So he only has 5 strings on his guitar, and he plays it in open tuning. and
now that's complicated.
It's weird.
Why didn't he just play 3 strings?
It's all he needed. Keith Richards could play 1 string, but the bass player had that down already.
Yeah, right.
I don't mean this to trash the. I actually like the early Rolling Stones.
Some of their stuff wasn't bad.
Like Paint It Black and, but especially when the 70s rolled around and the cheese started coming in, by the time the 80s rolled around, the Rolling Stones probably should have retired.
Yeah, they used to pick on the punks for making songs with 3 chords. Well, the Stones did a couple of songs with 2 chords.
Oh, sure they did. Satisfaction doesn't even have it's got like 5 notes. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, it was pretty simple. It was very popular. I think I was in 9th grade when that hit.
Yeah, but that sound for that time was pretty wild. That was a heavier sound than the Beatles were doing.
Yeah.
The Beatles were kind of fluffy, actually.
Yeah, the Dave Clark 5 had an interesting sound because they added a keyboard with their stuff. And even though they weren't as popular, some of their stuff was kind of interesting to play.
I agree. Yeah, they didn't really get the praises that the other 2 bands got. Was it because they weren't as good looking?
I don't know. Who am I to comment on guys that are good looking? I mean, I wouldn't know about that. But I can tell you this, that their sound was actually a lot heavier and bigger.
Yeah.
They had a very big, heavy sound, and that's why I kind of liked them. But after a while, their stuff started to get kind of, blah.
That happens.
And they broke up. They finally broke up in 1969. They could see the handwriting on the wall that their type of music was not going to go anywhere, because as we'll get on later in the decade, you'll see how things changed very radically, because the next bunch that came out about 1965, 66, especially 66, you had bands like Cream, you had bands like Jimi Hendrix, you had bands like Jefferson Airplane, you had singers like Janis Joplin, who really, really harped on blues. They really pushed the envelope when it came to blues.
Then you had the Paul Butterfield Blues Band, who wasn't even a blues band.
No.
That's what I thought was great about that.
Yeah.
Well, you guys don't even play the blues. Yeah.
I forgot to mention, way back when the Beatles and the Stones and Dave Clark 5 were big, you had a bunch of knockoff bands that were really kind of pathetic. They made some money and they had some hits, but you had bands like Freddie and the Dreamers.
Hey, we're the Monkees.
And the Monkees was a television band.
We're not monkey to rap.
They were a television band,
and
they actually had 2 guys in the band who could actually play well.
Yeah, but the lead guy didn't even know how to play. What was his name? Davy Jones.
Yeah, he was just a singer with a tambourine.
Yeah.
And Mickey Dolenz sort of played his drums, sort of.
I actually have all of the Monkees records on vinyl, but they all say Pret Martin on them. Because my mother, I inherited my mother's record collection sometime in the 90s, and she had every Monkees record because it was who they were marketing to, teenage girls.
Yeah, and Peter Tork, the bass player, actually could play well.
Yeah.
And Paul, Mike Nesmith.
Yep. He was a drummer, right?
No, he was a guitar player.
No, it was a drummer that didn't even know how to play drums. They had to teach him how to play drums.
Yeah, Peter Tork.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
But he was good once he got it.
Mike Nesmith was a good musician, but he was awfully moody. He was an extremely moody character, and eventually, when the Monkees broke up, it was basically because of his ego.
Huh.
You know, Peter Tork was a good musician. He didn't care what he played as long as he went along with it. So, but some of these other bands that came out in and around that time from the UK. Some of them were, like I said, Herman's Hermits and Freddie and the Dreamers.
Herman's Hermits. I have some of those on 45s too. They also say Pret Marsh on them.
Yes.
I mean Martin.
Uh-huh.
She wasn't married at the time.
No, let's hope not.
We went by her maiden name back then. But yeah, I have my mom's old record collection, which is that kind of stuff, and then I have my dad's record collection, which is the stuff that you're talking about now, like Cream, Led Zeppelin, and Jimi Hendrix, and so it was a good eclectic mix. Yeah,
the Jimi Hendrix era, the Cream, Jefferson Airplane, there was Big Brother and the Holding Company was another one.
They're fantastic.
There were others. Well, Grateful Dead sort of came around late then too. That was what they called acid rock. And the reason they called it acid rock was because supposedly if you listened to Lawrence Welk and took acid, this is what it would sound like. Supposedly,
I never, the only term that, I never really understood the term acid rock because to me it just sounds like rock music, except for Jefferson Airplane. Because every Jefferson Airplane song has this sonic quality that goes wow, 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 wow. And I mean, Hendrix did a little bit with his guitar, but the rest of the instruments were keeping something about Jefferson Airplane. I don't know if they were when the reel-to-reel was wobbling when they were recording, but everything is rah, 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 rah. And even her voice did that.
Yeah, Grace Slick.
Yeah, Grace.
Most people don't realize it, but she was not the original singer for that band.
Who was it?
It was a woman by the name of Signe Anderson. She sang on the very first album called Jefferson Airplane Takes Off, and by the second album, she was gone, and the drummer Skip Spence was gone. They replaced him with a guy named Spencer Dryden. Yep. I didn't think their drummers were very good. Not very good at all. Back then they just put the drummers sort of in the back. Yeah,
you really didn't see innovative drummers until Cream and Jimi Hendrix.
Yes, and those bands, boy, they had some dynamite drummers. I mean, you couldn't find better drummers at the time than Mitch Mitchell and Ginger Baker.
Ginger Baker's one of my favorites.
Oh yeah,
Mitch Mitchell's good too, but Hendrix did one album with Ginger Baker. It's the Band of Gypsies, right?
No, that was with Buddy Miles.
Oh, right.
Buddy Miles wasn't that good, but he was okay.
There's one that he did with I forget his name already. Not Mitch Mitchell.
He had Billy Cox
Ginger
on
Baker.
bass.
Maybe Hendrix didn't do one with Ginger Baker.
I don't
maybe
know.
I'm thinking
I don't think
of
he
Buddy
did.
Miles.
If he did, I'd like to hear it. But I know that he switched out bass players. He had Billy Cox instead of Noel Redding.
That's what it was. That's that's Band of Gypsies.
That was Band of Gypsies.
I love
and
that.
Billy Cox was good.
Yeah.
That was Billy Cox, Jimi Hendrix, and Buddy Miles.
Okay, that's what I was thinking of, I guess.
Yeah.
Ginger Baker was just with Cream and
Blind Faith.
Blind Faith.
Then he went off and he did Ginger Baker's Air Force.
Really? I don't remember that.
Yeah, they did a couple albums. Then Ginger Baker started experimenting with African drum beats, and went to Africa and did some work over there. Yeah, he was big into that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then that whole thing started, and not only that, but with acid rock, things started to get louder and heavier, and then your festivals started. For the first one was the first big one was Monterey Pop Festival, which is still going, by the way, but 60,000 people, that was a big deal, and then of course Woodstock hit.
Yeah, that was a little insane. What was that, like 500,000?
Yeah, 600,000, 500,000, something like that. And most people don't remember it, but there were some big ones that followed that. Well, I don't know. Excuse me. I don't know the exact numbers, but Altamont was right after that, and that ended in massive amounts of violence.
Did it?
Yeah, that was the end of using the Hells Angels for security. Big Brother and the Holding Company and Grateful Dead and some other bands used them for security, and it worked out pretty well.
The Stones did too.
Yeah, and what Mick Jagger didn't realize was that the Hells Angels in England were different than the Hells Angels in the U.S.
Yeah.
And he didn't figure that.
They're proper in England.
Yeah. Yeah, they wouldn't insult you before they killed you.
Yeah.
So, and then but after that, it was funny, right after Woodstock and Altamont, along came the Atlanta Pop Festival, which was 150,000, and that's where Grand Funk Railroad got their start.
Is it?
Yeah, the Atlanta Pop Festival. That was 1969 or so.
Wow.
And this whole, like I said, Woodstock was the pinnacle of the acid rock generation.
Yeah.
You had Richie Havens, Arlo Guthrie, and oh gosh, there was another one too.
Well, you even had Joan Baez.
Joan Baez was
you
there.
You had like the folk.
Country Joe and the Fish.
Yeah.
Was there.
I love Country Joe.
I think The Who was there too.
The Who was there.
Yeah.
The Who was there, and yeah, you had like the folk people, and then you had like the acid rock people.
Mm-hmm. Santana was there.
Yeah, Santana.
Jimi Hendrix played there.
Yeah, that was quite the.
That was quite something.
I'm trying to think, because if you watch the movie, there's a bunch of bands that actually didn't make the movie.
Right. A lot of bands didn't even make the show. They just Frank Zappa's band was supposed to make that, and they never got there.
Really?
Of course, you remember Leslie West and Mountain.
Uh-huh.
They had to fly them in by helicopter.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how jammed up everything was. They had to fly them in by helicopter.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that was quite something, to say the least. How they pulled that off, I'm not even sure.
And that was before the days of nowadays. When you go to a concert, and even a small concert like at the Champlain Valley Fairgrounds, they have TV screens on either side of the stage where you can see the acts no matter how far away you are. But you can imagine being in a sea of 500,000 people. There was nothing like that.
No.
There was absolutely nothing like that. That's going to suck to be in the last row at Woodstock.
Yeah.
That's why people did so many drugs, because after the 10th row, you couldn't see anything.
Yeah. They all looked the same anyway.
Well, might as well get high.
Yeah. Yes, there was a total lack of violence at that show also.
Yeah.
Total lack. Everybody was too stoned.
Yeah. Well, that's because they didn't let Budweiser in there.
Yeah. Oh, of course.
If there was alcohol at Woodstock, there would have been a lot
when
of
they
problems.
redid Woodstock in 1995, was it?
It was 95, 96.
I think it was like a 94. They had 25-year reunion or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had quite a bit of violence there at that one.
Oh, yeah.
Quite a bit of violence.
Yeah, Woodstock 2, sponsored by Pepsi.
That would make me
Everything
riot.
Woodstock was against.
Yeah, that would make me riot. Having to drink Pepsi, that would make me riot. That's for
Taste
sure.
of the next generation.
Ugh.
Here's Green Day. I actually wanted to go to that, but my parents didn't let me. Jerks.
I wasn't that interested, although that even with all that being said, the '60s were so innovative with these festivals. Now you've got scores of festivals all over Europe.
Sure.
And they don't draw as big as Woodstock, but you're drawing 85,000 to Wacken Open Air in Germany, and the concert series in Sofia, Bulgaria.
Yeah, and there's another one too.
Oh, they're all over Europe. They have them all over Europe.
Yeah.
Pink Pop is another one.
Pink Pop is huge.
Yeah, that's in
Glastonbury is a big one.
Oh, where's that one? Scotland?
Yeah. Yeah, Dolly Parton actually did that one.
Wow.
Which is really funny because they were kind of like surprised, and she was like one of the hits of the festival. Like she was the only country person there. Mm-hmm. In the States, you've got a few, like you have Bonnaroo that's going on. I don't even think Lollapalooza is still kicking, is it? It might be.
I don't know. It used to be Lollapalooza, and there was even Ozfest.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's still going or not.
I don't think so. And then you've got like South by Southwest does it quite a bit different in Austin, Texas. It's not just one big field, it's many venues. And you can go to Austin and get a pass, and you can just see live music for like a week. Yeah, I think that's a pretty cool way of doing it.
That's like what they did. They do at some of these. I think they do it at Wacken. You basically have 3 stages.
Yeah, yeah. That's what we have at the Newport Jazz Festival. Big difference.
I failed to see the connection.
You imagine seeing 300,000 people at the on the causeway in Newport?
You know, when I saw some of the rock bands that I've seen recently, the biggest venue I think I went to was 2,500, and to me that's fine.
That's fine.
I like 1,000 to 2,000 is fine.
You can see everything where you're sitting.
Yeah. It doesn't matter where you sit. You can basically see everything. But if they put 300,000 people on the causeway, I'd go to it just for the fun of it.
Oh, I would too. Yeah. There's something to be said for the size of venues, though. Like, I don't like going to stadium shows anymore because this sounds horrible, and if you're in the nosebleed section, you can't see anything.
Right.
You're better off to go to a theater. That's what theaters are designed for.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, I would much rather do that.
And fields technically are designed for farming, not for music, but...
And designed for mud.
For mud, yeah. Well, I went to the Fish Festival here in Coventry, the last one for 2 years, and that was pretty much just a mud festival.
Yeah, it was like Woodstock. It rained all through Woodstock, yeah.
Yeah.
So...
That was my generation's Woodstock, I guess.
Yeah, right. Tell me something. After about 10 minutes, if you weren't doing the right drugs, you didn't know what song they were playing.
You didn't know what song they were... I don't think Fish knew what song they were playing. That was actually not a very good show. And it was shortly after that Trey Anastasio checked himself into rehab, and I think that's part of why Fish broke up.
They back together yet or not?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they've been back together for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
That show was very... I listened to about the first hour of the show and then went back to my campsite.
Mm-hmm.
It was not good.
Yeah, excuse me.
It was an experience.
My brother-in-law said that he went to it, and he said, if you were listening to a Fish song, the first 10 minutes were fine. Then after that, if you weren't doing the right drugs, you didn't get it.
Yeah.
It was like, I don't know what they were doing, tuning their instruments or something or other. It was like when Cream or Jimi Hendrix went on a long jam, it was at least cohesive.
Oh, yeah.
And they would come back and they would finish the song with the jam in the middle of it. But speaking of which, we're going to wrap up the decade.
Yep.
What the acid rock people did unwittingly, they sort of ushered in the next wave, which was the heavy metal age.
Yeah.
Most people think of heavy metal and they don't think that it came out until, into the 70s, but it actually started around 1969. Pretty much.
Right.
Although if you listen to some Deep Purple from 1968, you would not have recognized it. It was not nearly as heavy as it was going to get by 1970.
Really?
Yeah. The first couple of things that they did it was hard rocking, but the recording techniques were so horrid back then.
Yeah.
Very, very horrid.
Yeah.
Back then in the 60s, you could buy an album and, wow, this sounds pretty good. Then you get an album and go, holy son of a gun, this sounds like crap.
Yeah.
Because there was no continuity of production.
No.
Today, if you don't sound good on your album, there's something really wrong. You need to get a new engineer or a new studio because things now are just so different.
Oh, yeah.
Even the worst sounding albums sound fantastic.
Yeah, it's very true.
That's
super true. I've got some old albums from the 60s and even the 70s in my record collection, and they sound horrid. But, what are you going to do?
Yeah, I think one of the, if you listen to Cream's first album and then listen to their second album, you'd say, boy, what a difference. Very big difference in recording quality. The third album, Wheels of Fire, was recorded pretty well.
Yeah.
If you listen to Jimi Hendrix's first album, it actually wasn't recorded too bad. By the time he got up to Axis Bold as Love and then Electric Ladyland, big improvements.
Oh, yeah.
Very big. Somebody got a hold of it and said, we really need to produce this and do it right. Grand Funk Railroad, their first album was horrible.
Really?
Because their producer's name was Terry Knight, and he didn't believe in spending a nickel for production. I mean, he was a tightwad.
That's awesome.
Yeah. The second album was raw, but at least it sounded okay. But that first album was, boy, it was pretty bad. How can you take a three-piece band and make it sound like mud?
We're recording you on acetate. It's fine. We're going to use this newfangled tape stuff.
We're recording you on acid.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's cool. Fine, man.
Speaking of that, we can't ring out the 60s without talking about the first big hit by Bob Dylan, Rainy Day Women.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know if that was the first big hit of his, but it definitely was. Definitely was one that many people identified with.
Yeah, and nobody knew what the
incorrectly.
nobody knew what the real name of it. Everybody thought the song was "Everybody Must Get Stoned," but that wasn't the name of the
It's
song.
like "Rainy Day Women" number 12 and 35 or something.
Yeah, I wonder how many joints he smoked before that one.
I don't know. There's like what? Let's think of the instruments in there. There's like a slide whistle, a kazoo, not a slide whistle. One of those fan ones, the ones that you go, and it goes woo.
And there was a tambourine,
an organ.
some sort of a calliope sounding organ.
Get stoned,
wasn't it?
Tuba.
And a bunch of people that were kind of stoned, just making noise.
Yeah, he even laughs at it. That was what was great about that decade. You still tracked live.
Mm-hmm.
This is before you were starting to do
overdubs
and separate tracking. They would have had a bunch of different microphones, and you can hear Bob Dylan laughs in that song.
Yeah.
Because somebody yells or does something funny, and they kept it in. Like nowadays, they wouldn't keep that in.
He even mispronounces a couple of words.
Does he? I guess I've never really.
Yeah, instead of they'll stone you when you're young and able.
Oh yeah.
Instead of young and able.
Yeah. They'll stone you when you're young and able. One can only wonder if that song was about, actually being stoned to death by punishment or stoned to death by mood-enhancing substances.
Not that we know anything about that.
I'm sure it was the latter.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Dylan claimed that it was. I think Dylan claimed that no matter what you do, you're going to be cut down because the media was always trashing him for his voice and everything. But I think it was really about getting stoned.
I think you make a good point there, and I'll give you an example. For example, the Byrds.
Yep.
Who actually covered a Dylan song. The song "Mr. Tambourine Man" was actually a Dylan song. They covered it, and it was extremely popular.
That was their first hit, I think.
That was one of them, yeah. Mr. Tambourine Man, and then there was "Turn, Turn, Turn." But the song 8 Miles High by the Byrds, everybody thought that was about getting high and drugs and everything. It wasn't. It was about being in an airplane and flying from city to city.
Well.
Why should we get hung up on semantics,
People were looking for hidden meanings and stuff that weren't hidden or weren't intended to be hidden.
However, I really don't buy the argument with that John Lennon gave of "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds," that his nephew or somebody in his family wrote it, and it was just kind of,
Apparently, Julian Lennon drew a picture.
Yeah.
And called it "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds" or something.
I'm really having a hard time buying that one.
Yeah.
I really am.
Right. It's probably about LSD.
Yeah. Well, if you ever saw the movie Yellow Submarine.
Oh, yeah. I've seen it. It's, whoa.
It's out there.
It is, but it's fantastic.
Yeah.
All their movies. I forgot about the Beatles movies. We didn't talk about those.
Yeah. The Dave Clark Five did a movie called "Having a Wild Weekend," which was horrid. I didn't see it, but I saw bits and pieces of it. It had no continuity at all.
I've never heard of it.
Yellow Submarine. Did they do another one?
Help.
They might have. I can't remember.
Hard Day's Night.
Mm-hmm.
And the Yellow Submarine.
Hard Day's Night. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I swear there's one more later on. Maybe Yellow Submarine was the last one. It's animated for the most part.
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah. It's so weird.
Yeah. The Beatles, whether you love them or hate them, you have to admit about the Beatles, they redefined rock and roll twice.
Yeah, they did.
When they first came out with songs like "She Loves You," "I Want to Hold Your Hand," I think it was 62, 63, 64, somewhere around there. That redefined rock and roll. And then when they did the Sgt. Pepper album, it redefined it again because to me that was the first ever concept album.
Oh, yeah.
Or even rock opera, they might have even called it. That was the first one of those. And then after that, of course, The Who did Tommy, which was huge. And that was a rock opera / concept album.
Exile on Main Street? Wasn't that supposed to be one?
Was that the Stones?
Yeah.
That's why I didn't pay attention to it.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a concept album, but honestly, I think it's just an album that all the songs just bled into it another. I don't think there's a concept.
Yeah. Yeah, some of your other artists.
Pink Floyd.
Pink Floyd, that now
They mastered the concept.
I didn't even realize they came out in the 60s.
Yeah, they did. They were weird in the 60s.
Yeah.
With what's his name?
Waters?
No, it was
Gilmore?
Well, Waters was there. It was before Gilmore. Sid Barrett.
Sid Barrett, that's right. Yeah.
Gilmore replaced Sid Barrett because Sid Barrett went a little bit.
Really?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
But they were out in the 60s. They were much more psychedelic acid rock. And then when Gilmore took over, they became more spacey, or what you know as Pink Floyd today.
Yeah.
I really don't like the early Pink Floyd era that much. I love the David Gilmour, Roger Waters stuff.
Yeah. They didn't become really popular until about 73 when they did the song Money.
Yeah, Dark Side of the Moon came out in 73.
Dark Side of the Moon was quite out there. Very much out there. You didn't need, this is what I keep telling people. You didn't need to take bad drugs to get this experience because you could just listen to this music and you had it.
Yeah.
Really.
That's one of the big conceptions of Pink Floyd, was that they took a bunch of acid, and they really did not. They drank a little bit and sometimes smoked a little bit of pot, and that was it. Mm-hmm. And Roger Waters even said maybe a couple beers after a show, and that was about it. Mm-hmm. But everybody thought that Pink Floyd just must be all whacked out on drugs because of how strange they were, but they weren't. They were just what you would call good musicians.
Yeah, and Frank Zappa, whose career went all the way up to the day he died.
Yeah,
he started in the 1960s with the Mothers of Invention, which they were pretty whacked out. But Frank Zappa himself said, "I only smoked pot 3 times. Twice it didn't work, and the third time I really didn't like it. I had a bad time with it, and he never smoked again."
Yeah, and he didn't drink either.
Very little.
He said in his younger days, where all they could afford were beans and rice in their apartment, and he'd eat a bunch of beans and rice and then drink a beer, and his stomach would swell right up, and he hated it. Frank Zappa drank coffee and smoked cigarettes, and that was it.
Yeah, he used to think of cigarettes as food.
Yeah, yeah. But he was as whacked out as it comes.
Yeah.
And a genius too.
Oh yeah, musical genius, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so the 60s ended with the ushering in of a new sound of heavy metal. And your earlier bands that were doing this, like I said, was Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, and even Emerson, Lake and Palmer, who were one of the first people to combine classical music in with rock. You can hear how they fused it. Emerson, Lake and Palmer were all classically trained. Yeah. And they led way for bands like Queen, who were all classically trained.
Oh, yeah.
So it's interesting to see how the 60s gave us all this innovation, and then the most popular music with the most popular festival of all time, Woodstock. Everyone's heard of Woodstock.
Oh, sure.
That was the end of it. That was the beginning of the end of the acid rock generation.
1969, right?
69 was it. Yes,
do you think that generation was, not generation, that the acid rock is such a big thing because of Woodstock, because it was only around for a couple of years?
I don't know. I think that everybody was searching for something new and different. Yeah. And what they ended up doing was squandering a whole bunch of money, taking a bunch of bad drugs, and when the bill came due, nobody had any money.
Yeah. Wow, that's rock and roll.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. They they wanted to find some sort of utopia, but what they, the concept was good, but the application was horrible. It was, the people that put on Woodstock, 3 days beforehand, they had to make a decision whether to put up the fences or build a stage. Yeah. And if you're going to put on something like that, you better get it before 3 days.
And you kind of need a stage.
Yes, indeed. They recorded, believe it or not, they recorded that on 2 Scully 8-track reel-to-reels.
Yeah?
Yeah. Two Scully 8-track reel-to-reels recorded that whole thing.
Wow. Well, it would have been something to see, I guess, but...
Yeah, you can see. I think I saw the movie.
The movie's all right, yeah.
Saw it a long time ago.
Yeah.
It was interesting. Some of the bands played really well. Some of them, I got to tell you, as much as I love Jefferson Airplane and some of their albums, they were not good live. Live, they were not a good act. Yeah. They really were not a good act. They weren't musically. The best 2 guys in the band took off right after Woodstock. That was Jorma Kaukonen on guitar and Jack Cassidy on bass, and they went into Hot Tuna.
Yep.
But the rest of the band, they really weren't that good.
No. What did Grace Slick? Did she ever go solo?
Grace Slick. Well, the Jefferson Airplane then morphed into the Jefferson Starship.
Yeah, that's right.
And they did a couple of pop songs, and by 1969, she had to enter a rehab because she was really messed up.
Yeah.
And then Starship came out about 1979, and that was pretty good. And then they let her back in the band, and that was
it.
I don't know why they let her back in, but she did a couple of albums on her own, 79, 80. One was called Welcome to the Wrecking Ball, which actually wasn't a bad album, but it was probably all about her career and how she wrecked every band she was in. But that's another story for another day.
There you go. Sounds about right.
Next time on our show, we're having the entire city of Cleveland in here.
Wow.
Going to be a small show, Todd. I'm
It'll
sorry.
be tiny.
Actually, we should probably do the 70s.
Yeah, might as well. Skip the 80s.
No, we'll get there. We'll get there eventually.
Now we can do the 80s. I don't mind the 80s.
The 70s were interesting.
The 70s, to leave you with, the 70s was a generation that had some of the greatest music and some of the worst music of all time, all in 10 years.
Yes. I remember one time I was talking to Todd way back, about 10 years ago. The music, the sappy 70s.
Yeah.
They had some of the worst, sappiest music of all time. And then you had other bands that were really top-notch.
Yeah.
But when you consider what the 70s was, and we will get to this in depth, you had the perfect antithesis. You had disco and punk. Not peacefully coexisting side by each.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all.
And then along came the next big innovation. And you know what that was? Motorhead.
Hell yeah.
And we'll get to that. That's a story that'll take 5 hours all by itself.
It could. Yeah, I think we should do the 70s next. That'll be a good one.
Because the 70s really started off as an extension of the 60s, and then it morphed into several
It became
things.
its own thing.
Yeah. There was a lot of interesting music. One of the last bands out of the 60s that I remember was the MC5. They did all of one album, and then they wanted to be the archetypical rock band, and they weren't talented enough to pull it off.
Nope.
They had they were a strange bunch.
And then in the 90s, you had the MC Hammer.
I don't think there's any correlation here, but that's okay.
I hope not.
We hope you enjoyed our show.
Absolutely.
This is Terry Difazio for Soundcheck, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Bye now.